Hello gamers, Power Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about the Legacy of Phrecia event in Path of Exile 1, also called Phrecia 2.0. So at one point this was actually its own league, its own 3-month league. I believe it was last year, and now they've made it into a 2-week or 2 weeks and some change event where they bring back the 19 Ascendancy classes from the original Phrecia league. I believe that's how you pronounce that. I'm not entirely sure. They're drastically different than the normal Ascendancy classes, and they just kind of let you have at it. And the new thing about this league is that it is being held in keepers. So it's being held kind of within the most modern league, so the new Breach League. But we have all of the things from the Phrecia League. So we have the Ascendancies and we have the Idols. Those are back instead of the Atlas Palace passive tree. So what do I think so far of the league after playing for day one? So my day one was, pretty mundane, I would say. It took a little bit to kind of get through the earlier acts because I'm doing a totem build and I'm doing it on the Surfcaster, and there's not a lot of innate synergy between those things initially. The build gets strong, kind of like we're at the point I'm at now, but in the early game it's not very strong. And I didn't realize that they were making so many drastic changes. I saw they were going to add a couple things, maybe make things a bit more challenging in some areas, but they really kind of went overboard. And basically what it seems like they did is at the end of every act, they added kind of like a gauntlet, almost like a Maven-style gauntlet, where different bosses come in and you have to kind of down those, and then you eventually get to the boss of the act and down that boss, and the Maven empowers some of those bosses with abilities. I don't recall if every mini boss was empowered, but there were definitely some mini bosses. For example, Hillhawk was kind of hilarious because you get Hillhawk on the beach and he's got the Maven in him and he does a ton of damage and he's a little bit hasted. I believe it's still possible for melee character to no hit him, as I was kind of no hitting him for a bit, but when he does hit you, he hits really hard. So obviously on a melee character, Hillhawk is way harder than normal. It reminds me of Hillhawk in kind of a gauntlet, how you have to kite and actually dodge the attacks. Whereas if you're just playing for the normal league, it's not really a problem. You can kind of just run through everything. So that was interesting, right? And then, like I said, even other mini bosses, there's double Hail Drake right off the bat. Act 1 seemed to be kind of almost the hardest act, just because we don't really have the build up and running. And especially in my case, I didn't have a particularly good plan to level on this Surfcaster or even the Shadow before you hit Surfcaster. So yeah, with not having a great plan, I was just kind of using some spell skills. I was mostly using Explosive Trap, and it worked out fine, but it was a bit slow. Obviously, things could have went way faster if I had a better plan going in. I didn't think I needed one because I didn't think I'd be encountering all of the boss mobs, but that's what really slowed me down. It's kind of just, I didn't really have great tools to deal with all the bosses very quickly. So it was relatively smooth, I would say, just kind of slow. Maybe if they do something like this again, I'll prepare a little bit more because I don't really like being stuck in the early game for any longer than I have to. But it was interesting. Ultimately, what do I think of it? I wasn't really a big fan of a lot of the stuff in the campaign, and some people might call me a Debbie Downer. I know a lot of people think stuff like this is fun. Ironically, if I was playing hardcore, I might have found it a little bit more fun. But since I was kind of playing to play softcore anyway, it kind of almost felt a little bit more like an annoyance. And it's difficult to say, right? I understand people they like new things. A lot of people probably enjoyed the idea that they kind of, added a little bit to the start of the game, right? My thing is that I feel like the start of the game is almost the worst place to add more content because it's the place where your build kind of just doesn't feel great to begin with for the most part, and beyond the game just feeling a bit clunkier early on, there's also the fact that a lot of people aren't really using the skill that they want to use, right? And I kind of understand the first part of it about the game feeling clunkier. That's what they want. Basically, they want the game to, be a little bit more awkward at the start. They want it to be a power fantasy thing, right? Where as you get more gear, as you get more levels, more ascendancy points, your character gets noticeably stronger. So, you can feel the difference between when you're level 90 in a map and when you're on the beach. It's not like a relative thing where you were, destroying people on the beach just as easily as you are at level 90. So I understand the thought process there. And this has always been a thing for them that they've, really clung to, in my opinion. And I actually think it's been to their detriment overall. I think if the game played a little bit cleaner at the start, I think if you had access to, just a little bit more of your abilities, right? If people could kind of play what they wanted sooner, more people would actually play the game. And it actually kind of got me thinking, or it always gets me thinking whenever I start a league, like how many people would actually really like this game if they played endgame, just kind of blasting through maps, but they just, they play that first act and they're just like, ugh, it's, so hard to get through this, right? Not even necessarily hard, like mechanically or skill-wise, but just like they don't want to get through it. And I do think that might actually be costing them a fair amount of players. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think there. And, it used to be back in the day that Act 1 was sort of like the easy act, at least, so your character still kind of felt clunky, but then the act was not really that hard, so it didn't really feel that bad. Then when they kind of did the pass over the acts, for some reason, Act 1 still was basically like the hardest act in the game in a relative sense, because they made it more difficult, and, in that relative sense, you don't have as much character power at that point. So it just kind of made the act a bit more annoying. I feel like it makes kind of like the streamlined starting skill thing a bit more important than it normally would be, right? You don't need to start any particular skill to get through Act 1. That's not what I'm saying, but there's a big difference between kind of using a meta setup, in particular in Act 1, versus using a non-meta setup. The amount of like time and difficulty it'll take to get you through the act, not using a meta setup, is just way higher. So I don't think that's really the greatest thing. And it surprised me back in the day when they basically made Act 1 even harder. And now for this league, Act 1 is even harder than it is normally. So not really a super big fan on that. And I was kind of wondering, I was like, man, this is a bit tedious for me, and I'm an experienced PoE player. So I'm kind of wondering, are people just going to like get in this and just stop? You know what I mean? Because sometimes for these leagues, in between leagues, I've kind of started with the intention of playing them, and then I just kind of stopped playing maybe a little bit into the first day or something. I'm just like, I just don't really feel like doing all this again. And this is from an experienced PoE player, who has a ton of hours in the game and kind of knows these acts and stuff by the back of my hand, and usually easily will get like a sub 6 hour Kitava, not really trying to speedrun, but pretty effortless 5-6 hour Kitava, even taking breaks and stuff like that. So yeah, for a normal player, especially maybe even a newer player, I sometimes think like, yeah, this would be like a lot for people to get through, especially with the earlier acts. And I was just like, man, if I'm not having a blast here, other people might not either. The thing that really kept me playing was the fact that I really do like the Surfcaster Ascendancy, and I think that some of the Phyrexia Ascendancies are kind of cool. And I left some stones unturned in the Phyrexia League itself, or the Phrecia League in itself. So I keep thinking, whenever I see the the word, it just reminds me of the magic Phyrexia stuff for some reason. I have no idea why. How your brain makes those associations. But yeah, so that was the main reason, is I wanted to kind of get back to Surfcaster because I had some things I wanted to experiment on, especially with being able to use some of the new Foulborn uniques in combination with the new Ascendancies. I wanted to do that, so I kind of pushed through a little bit. I'm glad I did because I had fun. But I was curious. I'm like, maybe we lost like a lot of the population, because there's some people in the chat. You're reading the chat, and they're like, oh man, like, I've died like 200 times by Act 3. And of course, they're probably just trolling, right? But you do wonder how difficult it was for your average player. Before I logged off, I actually checked like the total kind of, not the total number of players, but I was just kind of browsing through the ladder. And it seemed like a lot more people ended up getting to a decent high level than I thought initially. So that's a good sign, I think, that people are kind of enjoying the league, enjoying at least messing around with the new Ascendancies. And hopefully, the league stays pretty active for the duration that it is held for, because I'm finding it pretty fun so far, and I'll be playing more today. Ultimately, I think that a lot of the decisions they made for the earlier acts are kind of a bit, they're just sort of a bit lazy for the most part. Like, initially when I was coming in, I was like, ooh, I wonder if they're going to like customize the additions for every mini boss or every boss. I was like, that would have been a lot, and I'd be surprised. But it seems like they kind of really just changed a few things here and there, and just made things, generically stronger. And then they added the kind of mini Maven event at the end of the act, which honestly, past like the first or second act, just becomes a little bit annoying, because it just takes up more time, right? Like, once you have the damage and your build is properly set up to deal with the monsters, they're not really that difficult. It's just more about it taking more time, because whenever you kind of put one down, there's a little bit of an animation, the next one comes out. So yeah, I mean, I thought ultimately it was a bit lazy, to be honest, and I'm of the opinion that if you're going to do something like this, it's kind of like you go full bore or not, right? So fully commit to the bit of changing everything and, doing things in a custom way, or if you're not going to do that, there's Power Word Heal's phone. Or if you're not going to do that, then just kind of keep things the way they are. Maybe make some changes at endgame, But yeah, I didn't really like the idea of having to do a Maven fight at the end of every act. It wasn't too bad, but like I said, just kind of bleh. Like, what's the point of this? So ultimately, I'm enjoying the event we have here. It's mostly just the fact that we get to use the Ascendancies, and like I said, especially in combination with the Foulborn uniques. Not loving the additions that they've made a ton, but I'll have to see. I didn't go too crazy on the first day, and I got to like level 84, did a bunch of trading, so I got my like fishing rod set up and everything like that. Got all my Ascendancy points, so we're kind of ready to blast today. Like I said, didn't go that crazy, so didn't experience some of the more end game stuff or anything like that, and we'll be trying that out today. So I'll probably make another video tomorrow. What do you know what I think of that stuff? And I'll make a Surfcaster update soon, and we got some WoW videos to come as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. See you next time.